Hello, everyone. Happy to be back. This time we have with us a climate scientist, a flood expert, or maybe not yet an expert. We don't know. Anyhow, uh, let's listen to him. Right now we have with us Karthik Ramesh. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Karthik.
Thanks for the kind words and the introduction, Dr. Mathur. I am Karthik Ramesh. I am a flood scientist. I currently work at a ClimateX startup, and I work on providing climate risk intelligence to whoever is interested in it. Mostly that being large financial institutions like banks, asset managers, construction companies. So what that really entails is basically we provide what kind of physical risk exposure assets like buildings, offices, roads, and different infrastructure, what kind of exposure to physical hazards like storms, floods, subsidence, and other climate change related hazards. And we quantify the exposure to these different suite of risks, and we then convert that into an economic loss value. So essentially, it goes from a very scientific platform where you're looking at modeling the physical impact of climate change and then taking that into an economic and converting that into an economic estimate of how uh, or something like an estimate of what kind of losses an institution who owns or manages a large volume of these physical assets might be looking at. So, for instance, if you're a bank uh, who's like lending credit to a large number of people who are buying houses in a particular region of Asia, let's say, who are at a larger exposure to flooding over the next 25 years. So that means that if those physical assets are at a risk of being damaged or destroyed due to flood in the next couple of decades, they're probably not going to get a return on the investment that the particular bank or institution made uh, with respect to the return on the loans or the mortgage that they provided. So in terms of like financial risk assessment, the chances of a default is significantly raised. So over the last 100 odd years, financial institutions have gained a lot of expertise in doing this, but not with respect to climate change.
Mhm.
They have a lot of expertise in stress testing and looking at credit default and credit scores and all of these different factors, but they're super new to looking at this with the lens of the climate that is changing. So I am really passionate about my job. I love the company that I work for. We are a small climate startup based in London called ClimateX. And we hope to fill the space where we provide the intelligence and the expertise needed to help quantify the financial estimates of how climate change is going to affect the physical and the built infrastructure. So that is just a brief background on what I work on right now. So my background is actually uh, in numerical modeling and simulation of water resources. I am an engineer by training, even though I have to say I have done little to no engineering work. My professional experience has mostly been related to modeling and more geared towards the scientist realm. So I have a bachelor's and a master's degree, both in engineering, but I think like most Indian engineers, I have done little to no engineering in my career so far. So I previously have also worked on, so I got my bachelor's degree in Delhi Technological University. So before I started working on the water side of things, I've also worked on like air pollution monitoring and control. So back in 2018, I did a study in which we were looking at how air quality in the capital city and the larger NCR region was being affected due to the different activities related to Diwali. and stubble burning and like whatever anthropogenic activities go on during that time of the year, and how the climatic conditions and the different atmospheric conditions that prevail in the whole part of northern India affect the ambient air quality conditions in the NCR region. So, I mean, without going too much into the political aspects of this, because this issue gets political really quick. Uh, the I guess the conclusion that we came to was that uh, the NCR as a whole uh, cannot be looked at as like an isolated entity in order to have a solution to this problem, because the entire Indo-Gangetic belt suffers from this condition of like very low wind speeds and very low atmospheric mixing during the winter months in India. So any isolated solution or any isolated policy solution which is just targeted towards the NCR is again something that's going to be very non-feasible in tackling this long term. So I just want to use this as like a case study to just highlight that climate change as a whole is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. It is a very real concept, and it doesn't know any jurisdictional boundaries, and it doesn't know any national or international borders.
Mm.
So any kind of solution that uh, is going to be effective or long term needs to be thought out on a regional and on an international scale, given the fact that uh, any kind of effective solution needs to come from uh, a deep-rooted understanding of science, and the fact that politics is not always aligned with science is something that always like comes in the way of any long-lasting climate change solutions. So I have some experience in working with implementing scientific expertise to make political decisions and uh, large-scale writing policy, because my first job out of my grad school experience was at a consulting firm. So this was back in California. So I lived in California for 5 years between 2019 and 2024. So I think when we mention California, what comes to everyone's mind is like the Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and like picturesque mountains and all that. What very few people know is agriculture is one of the biggest industries in California. It accounts for about $50 billion annually in the state's GDP. And if California was a country, I believe it would be having the fourth biggest GDP in the world. And I think about one third of that would be like contributed by agriculture.
Mm.
So the paradox we are looking at here is California is actually a drought state.
Yes.
And it's been in like extreme drought condition for I think the last 11 years or however long. And the last drought that is in record has been, I guess, the worst or the least rainfall that the state has received ever since like weather records were a thing. So how does that paradox exist? How do you have the most amount of agriculture and the most amount of high value crops like almonds, for instance? Like the amount of water that's required to cultivate like 1 pound of almonds is like very disproportional to the amount of water that it requires. So how does the state function in this paradox? So what California has going for it, despite its extremely arid conditions, almost making it a desert, is the fact that uh, the US built a lot of water infrastructure in the state. So there are about, uh, just to ballpark it, about 600 miles of aqueducts and canals running along the length and breadth of the state, which move water from a reservoir that's in the northern part of the state as far south to the Central Valley, which is the agricultural hub of California. So about 60% of the state's agricultural water needs are met by either rainfall or the water that's moved, the surface water that's moved through these canals. But where does the other 40% come from? The answer is groundwater. So the state's groundwater aquifers are not in a really great state. Some of the world's most critically overdrafted groundwater aquifers are in California. And by critically overdrafted, I mean the rate of recharge or replenishment is very minuscule compared to the rate of extraction. So we have some of the world's most badly overdrafted aquifers in the state of California. And I had the fortune or misfortune of working with two of the 50 most overdrafted basins in the world. It's either a fortune or misfortune, depending on which lens you're looking at it through. So I think, yeah, it's actually exactly a decade ago. In 2014, the state of California passed this legislation called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And as a part of, uh, it's called Sigma in short, so I'm just going to refer to it as Sigma to make it easier. So what Sigma entails is any user of groundwater in the state of California had to come up with a plan or set of guidelines by which they outlined how they would be sustainably using their groundwater by the year 2040. So what that created was, in basically a free market, Americans love free markets, in this sort of free market of water where anyone who had rights to water could just extract an unlimited, infinite quantity of water. Water is basically viewed at like like a free resource by most people. We just know we turn on the tap, water comes out. It's infinite, it's free. That's how a lot of people look at it. But basically, we went from that to overnight needing to look at how to sustainably manage this resource. And what that created was this need for people who had the technical expertise, but could also contribute towards helping make these policy decisions. And I think that's where I fit in. I worked in that intersection between technical expertise, modeling, and decision making for about 3 years. So I think my role as a water resources expert was to uh, work on groundwater modeling and simulations. So we would build and calibrate these very region-specific models for our clients who were either water districts or like the state government or just different entities who use water. They could be small cities, they could be agricultural districts, and like some of them control like swaths of land which again are owned by billionaire farmers. You would be surprised at the extent of wealth that runs in the agricultural valleys of California. So I was the person who sat um, in my office running these groundwater models, who would come up with sort of like a glide path, or like basically it was something like, you set these intermediate milestones or these steps in which you cut down your water usage. So by the year 2040 or by the year 2070, you're sustainably using your water. So in some basins, it's easier, in some it's hard, and in some it's close to impossible, because if you're extremely overdrafted, you don't go from you can like even like suspend all agricultural activities, but like nature doesn't return to its normal state in 30 years or like however long it takes. So essentially, like we just develop and we produce a different set of tools. We build some, we use some numerical models which are peer reviewed and published by entities like the US Geological Services. And I think I really enjoyed the experience of like, because I think growing up in India, going to a university in India, we get to see a lot of things through the lens of a classroom, but not really the interaction of like real world decision making with science. And I think I was lucky to uh, like firsthand get the chance to work on my scientific experiments, run my models, and then take those results and present it to like the lawmakers, so to speak. So I have been part of discussions and part of meetings where we take our results to these small governmental bodies in these towns in California where they're supposed to make these decisions on how they're using their water. Uh, it's it really was an interesting experience because a the people who sit on the boards of those organizations are not scientists, and b science can get very political in the US. So anything that's related to climate change needs to be presented in a very subtle and in a very not in your face manner, so to speak. So I think that really uh, gave me a really good exposure on how to like present science in layman terms, because I love science, I love data, I can make plots and I can talk about my models and physics all day long. But in order for that to be meaningful, in order for that to actually be having some sort of meaning in the real world, I had to adapt and understand that in order for that to make sense to like people who actually make these laws, I had to break that down, give them the essence of it. I had to learn what to say and what not to say, and what data needs to be presented and what needs to be left out. So yeah, I spent about 3 years doing that. Um about 6 months ago, I moved to London, and that's where I'm currently based. So I work in climate tech now. I work at a startup working on the um working on the financial quantification of physical climate change risk to critical infrastructure. I think you're on mute.
So how did you make it from India to California?
That's a good question. So I am from South India. I grew up in Tamil Nadu for the most part. I spent some time in the Middle East because my parents worked there for a while. But I did most of my high school in a small town in Tamil Nadu, and then I guess the like most people who are good at academics in India, I got bit by the IIT bug, and I moved to Chennai to enroll in a IIT coaching prep center. And I guess I didn't really know. I mean, I wanted to say this before, but I'm a climate scientist by accident. This is not something that I set out to do, or this is not something that I grew up wanting to become.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to be an engineer because I was good at maths, physics, and chemistry. And I guess growing up, you're like, yeah, if you're good at biosciences, you become a doctor. If you're good at like physics, chemistry, and math, you become an engineer. So it's sort of like this duality of what choices you have. So yeah, I went to an IIT prep center while I was filling out my college applications. I had no idea what branch I had to pick. I had absolutely no. I think I was sure that I did not want to become a computer science engineer because it kind of did not feel like engineering to me. It sort of felt like a pseudo engineering department, uh, which is kind of funny because now I work with computers, models, and coding all the time. But back then, I became an environmental engineer because that's what my rank offered me, which is kind of a sad reality, but it worked out well for me. But I think for a lot of people that I know, they end up by virtue of, whether they have a really high rank, they just end up picking like computer science or mechanical or electrical or whatever, like whatever the world expects someone with a good rank to pick. Whereas, like, if you're not getting into one of those streams, you just end up with what you get. So I became an environmental engineer. I did not know what that meant for the longest time, even after I got into my university. So it's actually interesting because in my second year of my undergrad, me and a couple of other friends, we wanted to really get into sports analytics. And we, all three of us were really into cricket. And we actually like bootstrapped this I don't know if I can call it a startup, but I'm just going to call it a startup for now. But we put together this little algorithm where we could analyze like the value of cricket players while they go into an IPL auction.
Mm.
So basically, we targeted the IPL franchisees because we thought that we knew better than them when it came to building a team, because like you look at some of the decisions that these teams make and it's highly questionable. So I did that for a while. I briefly worked with Chennai Super Kings for about 3 to 4 months. Did some sort of loose consulting with them, but we found out that the startup world in India for like 19-year-old people is not easy to get into.
No.
And yeah, we made some mistakes, had some learning, and I don't know, I sort of felt like I wasn't really enjoying that like sports analytics world. And that was around the time when being in Delhi, you just cannot, I guess, you know, whether you're a climate scientist or not, you are exposed
Yeah.
to the effects of climate change. And I think it was the year either 2016 or 2017 when we had that time in October when the AQI dropped to 999. And it could have been way worse than that. It's just that the AQI scale is capped at 999. So it could have been God knows how much.
Yeah.
So me and another like colleague of mine, we developed this interest in like trying to find out if we could, study or quantify how air pollution could be like controlled from an engineering controls perspective and also from a policy perspective,
Mm.
which then took me towards that project that I briefly mentioned earlier, where we
Mm.
looked at the effects of different anthropogenic activities during the winter months.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that got me hooked onto the field of like climate science and environmental engineering. And yeah, I sort of wanted to explore that more. And I ended up applying to grad school. And yeah, I would say I was fortunate to get into a school like Stanford. And I I intended to study more about atmospheric modeling and air quality when I moved to Stanford, but I think I don't know. I feel like I'm very malleable when it comes to like, what my interests are.
Yeah.
So in Delhi, it seemed like the hot topic or like what affects people the most was air pollution. When I moved to like Palo Alto in California, it seemed like they have great air there, but the water there is like such a pressing issue. It's
Yeah.
like drought conditions. My course advisor at Stanford was a renowned professor in the field of like water resources. So I think my conversations with him, the courses that I took, it kind of pushed me away from the atmosphere into water. And yeah, I think that's the path that I'm still on. I really enjoy what I'm doing now. I don't think I'll move out of this field anytime soon.
Okay. So what's the future for you? As you will imagine, I mean, I know you are an opportunist, you are malleable and all that, right? So, but in this malleable, opportunistic life, take advantage of things as they come. Where do you think you're headed?
I would I really want to continue working in the field of like just broadly speaking, climate change.
Yeah.
So I think what that would mean for me is I want to be at the interface of like decision making and like scientific, like I basically want to leverage both my scientific background and be in a position which also like, you know, makes a real impact in the world.
Mm.
So right now, I feel like the position that I'm in, I can actually have a tangible impact because I work with real financial institutions and
Yeah.
uh, uh, going forward, I would like to be in a more like decision-making capacity, like either in a consulting firm or like, I don't know, I have not ruled out starting something of my own again. I know I've like failed once at trying to launch a startup, but maybe second time or third time's the charm.
Yeah.
I would I would really love to like come back to India and like work on the multitude of climate change issues that India faces or the sustainability problems that India faces.
Mm.
I don't know, it just feels very daunting and scary because thinking about it from an Indian perspective, it is scary to even think about where to begin because it's like we we have just lived in ignorance and we have gone about I don't know, the 70 odd years since independence, pretending like climate change is not real.
Yeah.
If you look at, any of the major South Indian cities, like Kerala had this insane flood in 2018. And since then,
Yes.
we have had floods every year.
Yeah.
Chennai had this really bad flood in 2016. People were displaced, like
Yeah.
second and third floors of houses were flooded.
Right.
And we've had repetitive like flood events like that. I'm just mentioning floods because that's what I work in. But
Yeah.
we have water shortages in Bangalore, and then like 6 months later, we have a flood in Bangalore. So
Yeah.
like these issues are really like here to stay. And I think urban planning in India needs to really like get a facelift, and it needs to have a rethink on how cities are like growing very haphazardly.
Yeah.
I don't really think we have any well-defined, well-structured urban plans. Like Bangalore, I think is a great example of how the city just exploded in terms of like its human capital and um, economically, it's grown a lot. But does it have the natural resources side to support that growth? I think the answer is like
No.
it's a big no. So. And
Yeah.
similarly, I think any major Indian city for that matter, like Mumbai is at a big risk of like sea level rise, and
Yeah.
Mumbai's infrastructure it's at a serious risk of flooding. Chennai is not safe from that. So yeah, I think we need to have a really hard look at like refurbishing our infrastructure, making that climate resilient, and having a set of like climate adaptation plans. Because India is like really late to the party. Like we have, like I was mentioning, like this is the 10th year of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in California.
Yeah.
India perhaps uses more groundwater than California for its agriculture.
Right.
And we are in a worse state of drought, probably. It's just we don't have enough data to quantify which basins are overdrafted. I've had some conversations with scientists in Bangalore who are working on similar problems relating to groundwater usage. It's just that um, what my key takeaway from that was we just don't have enough data to like quantify any of these problems. It's just in broad strokes, we know this is a problem and uh, this is something we need to tackle. But I think there just isn't enough data to even like begin, or I think that's what scares me the most about um, thinking about it from an Indian perspective. Like the apartment in which my parents live in India, we start seeing cracks on like the walls, and
Yeah.
like for someone who's like in infrastructure and like science, that those are like signs of subsidence. Like
Yeah.
you're pulling out water from the water table,
Right.
soil is getting compacted, your foundation is becoming unstable, and you're seeing cracks on buildings. And
Right. Right.
I think like like whoever watches this video, if they go walk around and take a look at their buildings, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if like 50% of people can see similar kinds of like subsidence related cracks
Yeah.
on their buildings. So it's really a problem that's going to affect all of us. It's just a question of like when, but not a question of like if.
Okay. Well, I agree with you, and I usually don't like to talk much, but let me add here two things that I am involved in that actually don't address the problem as such, but try to sidestep it. One is that, as you rightly said, agriculture is soaking up the groundwater. When you say agriculture, actually, what we mean is that the HYV, wheat and rice are soaking up the groundwater, high-yielding varieties. High-yielding varieties saved us from starvation. I was around when we were the starving country. So they saved us. Congratulations, well done. But 50 years later, we have the groundwater problem. The groundwater problem actually came up 15 years after they were introduced. And there's actually nobody who's thinking much about it.
Right.
Of course, the Prime Minister has recently tried to promote the millets. Now, millets are less water intensive, and if that is successful, that's good from all points of view. But I also recently wrote an op-ed in the Hindu Business Line that our traditional varieties of wheat and rice, they will let us see if we can improve their market share. We cannot get rid of HYV, but we can, like we are exporting HYV rice. This is crazy. We grow it in Punjab and we export it like we are exporting Punjab's water. But Punjab has no water left. What are we exporting? You know, this is completely crazy. So we are no longer food short. We are got enough food. But let's see if we can increase the market share. Prime Minister wants to increase of millets. I say let's follow up an increase of traditional wheat and rice, which are much less water intensive. Of course, the yield per acre or land or whatever how you measure is lower, and therefore they are less economic. But let us see what the real economic cost is after you take account of the environmental degradation with the water which you're talking about. Right. And I did write in that look, we need to move to an output-based subsidy. Right? Instead of subsidizing, charge for the groundwater. Now you said in California it's free, but we need to begin to charge at least for the electricity that pumps the groundwater, and also some minimal charge for groundwater, and compensate that on the other side by giving an output subsidy. Right. So that your cost structure and profit structure remains the same, but your great desire to soak up groundwater goes away. You pay for a tax on groundwater, but you get it back on the output side. Right? And then you give that output subsidy to all kinds of wheat. Now, because right now when you subsidize groundwater, which by not charging for it, they're subsidizing only those who use a lot of it. And same for fertilizer. And also, if we can shift to an output-based subsidy structure, that would be one thing. Other thing is to try to find ways to reduce the costs. And nobody's really made a serious effort because everybody is thinking we need to produce more food. But India is not going to need much more growth in wheat and rice because, through the public system, we are already feeding most of the poor. And as incomes increase, it's not the consumption of rice and wheat that increase. Right. Because people are buying higher value crops. Okay? Or they want tomatoes, they want grapes, they want avocados, they want bhindi, they want all those other things. So it's not. So we need to really think about it. I haven't yet put my thought. I'm no expert, but I'm very concerned about the water degradation element of it. And certainly we could put an export tax on rice to recover. Okay, you don't want to tax the domestic people, but you can certainly say, look, we want to recover the cost of the groundwater that is being exported through the export tax on HYV rice. Right. Get that money back and use that to support other forms of agriculture. So that's one thing. And there are some people whom I'm going to talk to, but I'm also busy with many other things. One of those things is that I've given up on large cities. Okay. When you say there's no urban planning, there's actually no way the politicians are not interested because there are not enough votes there. Right? There are not enough votes. Okay. Bangalore, they wanted a new airport. For 10 years, they didn't give them that airport. Why? Because they say you don't give our people jobs. You hire people from all over India, all over the world. our people are being left out from you. You get another airport, how many jobs does it create for my people? You say, no, we are merit-based, we are this, that. Say, bloody hell, you are merit-based, my people are not even getting chaprasi jobs in your companies, right? So your places, peons, they don't even, so they basically don't want to give any support to those. So those people in Bangalore are growing on their own. They may have floods, they may have water shortages, finally they got an airport. 10 years later, after the whole world wanted a new airport in Bangalore, they finally have, right? Because there's no support. All these places, only thing they do is to put in metro. Okay, fine. But metro doesn't solve what you'd read 3 hours traffic jam in Bangalore, right?
Yeah.
But can't solve. So there's nobody interested in solving the problems. The big companies can't move out of there, and new ones are coming in. And the slums are going to be created because that's where the service sector jobs are. In home delivery of food, in this, that, and also you're going to have impossible life in large cities for years to come. And as you rightly said, groundwater falls, the company, foundation become, buildings will crack. There's no escape. I give up. I don't want to bang my head against this wall. So what I'm saying is, let's develop small towns. I wrote this 3 years ago. Let's develop small towns. And we have just, 3 small towns defined as 1 lakh population in 2011 census. It's large enough to have a Wi-Fi, large enough to have a district hospital, maybe an engineering college of some type, maybe a polytechnic of some type, and not too far from a railway station.
Right.
Maybe 1 hour by bus, 1.5 hours by bus to a railway station, something like that. So you have some options there. And they're not already booming, but we can create jobs and increase incomes. So the objective is, most NGOs don't have this. If they do have it, they aim it for very poor people. We are not aiming at very poor people. We are basically saying, let's look at these. They are not as poor as the people in the villages, but we are saying, if we can make this a place that grows, that people can migrate here rather than going to, and if some remote jobs come here, we can also try to build up the skill level. So this is new company will be called Ecotech. And it will be sort of networked, not sort of, will be networked in the sense that today an NGO can be set up with expertise from around the world built on experts. And supporters. And if you have a large number of experts and supporters, and you say, this is what we are doing, somebody in that network will say, look, I can't do it, but somebody in my network can do it. Right? Can help you, right? So that we actually don't have just our network, we have the network of the members of the network. Right? This is the thinking, and we have had 4 visits to one small town in West Bengal. It's in Birbhum district called Shuri. And the idea is to be hyper-local. To understand the situation as it is on the ground, no rush to implement it because we're going to be there 25 years, and then find a way to be accepted by the local officials, local people, and then say, look here, now we can come in with technology, ecology, and economy. That's Ecotech. And we can increase incomes and create jobs. Not everybody, but among the small, tiny handicrafts and all of this, 2 or 3 people who are entrepreneurial, hardworking, motivated, we help them. And we help them in whatever way they ask. We don't need in advance. If somebody says, I need a little bit of technology help, I have engineers. If somebody says, I need a bit of marketing help, I have marketing experts. So this is my network. Right? So this is the 2 things that I am trying to get going that look, and it's equitable regional development. Okay, so if you look at Karnataka, 40% of the state's GDP comes from Bangalore, and the other 60% comes from all across. And those people, their only hope is to go to Bangalore. What else can they do? Or Mysore? Okay, what else can they do?
Yeah.
So this unbalanced system that we have actually deprives the majority of people of equality of opportunity. Now I'm preaching, okay? Let's be clear. I'm preaching. So my preaching, I'm trying to translate into action. One, we will eventually. So we are looking. We have a new technology, not in agriculture but in horticulture, developed by my brother, to grow fruit trees in barren land with very little water. So you want to go, like we go to Shuri. Shuri, the river used to overflow and sink. So the topsoil is poor.
Hmm.
But in his method, you can grow it in topsoil, which is poor.
Okay.
You plant dragon fruit or some other thing there. 3-4 years later, it is established and gives you revenue. Right? So we do want to diversify away, and also to see if we can find a way, if they're growing rice there, then to find a way to say, listen, so for the traditional variety, I'm proposing that we develop a heritage tag.
Hmm.
Okay. Heritage, there's some credible NGO comes and says, hey, this is Heritage 100, means it has been grown here for at least 100 years. Then that gives you a premium marketing tool that people, and, directly try to sell to well-off people, give the farmer some income. They say, listen, this, and then the new guys who are going to, anyway, all this is in thinking terms and trying to actually create a heritage tag. The government can't do it, because the government's too full of too many things. Let some credible, and you know how California has so many credible institutions like Monterey Bay. They give a tag. Why can't we have an institution which says, look, this is, and it's not about how it is grown, but what it is. It's not organic, but this, right? It is okay, fine. This is our heritage. So we make it a point, it's our heritage, and it tastes different. And we may even be able to get a premium in exports. Right? This is heritage rice. Okay. So if there is a market, and the marketing people we have will be clever enough to say, this is how you sell it abroad.
Right.
So you need to think of all these things and not just necessarily one element. So this is sort of my activities that I thought I'll mention here, because I am actually now quite involved in them apart. And these Vidpeds are actually, I had no idea that I would be using them this way, but it turns out that we are using them this way. Okay, so enough from me. Let's hear from you.
No, those are really interesting. So thanks for breaking your tradition and like jumping in and providing your thoughts. Yeah, I like just on the topic of like agriculture and sustainable agriculture, the economics and the econometrics behind agriculture. So in my 3 years in California, I worked with indirectly or directly with a lot of stakeholders in the field of agriculture. I think like some of the biggest challenges in trying to like implement anything related to sustainability in agriculture is like it's really hard to convince someone in the field of agriculture that growing food is unsustainable and bad for the environment. Because the biggest arguments that a certain kind of politically motivated group in California have towards any kind of restrictions on water is that growing food cannot be a waste of water. So, their argument is like, as long as it's beneficial to people and it's like, yeah, I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, like food is beneficial to people. So as long as you're extracting water, as long as you're building dams, as long as you're like channeling off rivers in order to grow food, it cannot be called as unsustainable. But yeah, it's again the thing that even if you don't want to call it unsustainable, like in the case of the rice and the wheat varieties that you mentioned, it is the per acre or the per hectare output of the crop with respect to the amount of water that's used to cultivate it that we need to be looking at. Are we doing I mean, yes, we need X amount of food, and cultivating that X amount of food is never going to be a waste because we need to feed our population. But are we doing our best in order to extract the most amount of output? Are we using the most drought-resistant varieties of crops? Are we using the best and the most I mean, and this doesn't necessarily need to be the most expensive kind of irrigation, but are we using the most sustainable and the most uh, I mean, irrigation practices can be like very region specific as well. So are we using the best form of irrigation? Like you mentioned that your brother is working on like fruit plants which can grow in like barren topsoil. So again, that's like a very sustainable use of water, and the per hectare output of that would be like extremely sustainable. So
So
I think that kind of
you
differentiates.
won't hear me using the word sustainable. I mean, what we are saying is that, look, by his method, we are simply saying we can turn your barren land into income generating productive land. And our technology is such that it uses less water than even drip irrigation. Right?
Right.
So, but we don't emphasize that. We are saying this is income. In terms of rice and wheat, I've already decided that we will sell it in terms of heritage. Okay. This is our heritage, guys. We had to get rid of it because we needed the food.
Right.
But we already got enough food. We are exporting. So how can it be that we are short of food? If you are exporting and you're one of the world's largest exporters, you can't argue with me by saying, listen, we are short of food. No, we are not, but we are exporting. Right? We used to import food for charity. Now we are exporting food for money. So give me a break. Let me promote some of these guys into heritage. And we'll sell the heritage rice. We'll sell the heritage wheat. Right? Add to premium and increase the income of the farmers, and incidentally use less water.
Right.
Because arguing from the input point of view is not going to work. So I agree with you that we'll say, yeah, we need more rice, we need more wheat, but which type?
Right.
Which type? Why do we have to have only this type? Why can't we also have a share? Say if it is 20% share right now of traditional varieties, why can't we make it 30%?
Right.
Right? So we at least we mitigate the and if we shift to an output-based subsidy, then we are not giving the incentive to use groundwater.
Mm-hmm.
We are saying, look, you get so many rupees per ton. How the inputs you use, that's up to you. Right?
Right.
Then now your incentive is to minimize on the inputs. Right now, we have the worst idea that you subsidize the inputs, right? And once you subsidize the inputs, the guy says fertilizer is cheap, I'll dump fertilizer. Pesticide is cheap, I'll dump pesticides. Groundwater is cheap, they don't even charge me for the electricity, so I'll dump it. There's no incentive. Saying, look, all that we translate into so many rupees per ton. You produce so many tons, and now of course you cover it with insurance, because in case the crop is bad, then you buy insurance to cover the variability, and you get an output subsidy, which is equivalent to your input subsidy, but gives you the incentive to cut costs.
Right.
Right. And also reduce, you can argue more on imports. They say, look, fertilizer ultimately imported fossil fuel, and pesticide also imported stuff. So we cut our imports, we change the mix, we emphasize, but this is just my thinking, okay? And we are trying to see whether we can get it to move somewhat a little bit. I just found out recently from somebody 2 days back that in Odisha, there is a group called Revive Rain-Fed Agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And they have sustainability for the last 10, 15 years, not sustainability. 15 years, they have been working on getting more millet to grow in Odisha. It's not like today's headline. And they've succeeded.
Right.
They understood everything. So the whole idea is never to talk sustainability, is to say, look, this is our food.
Yep.
And it is also nutritionally healthy and sound. You don't have to eat it. It's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so enough of talk from my side. But I thought, since you're talking about these things and talking about large cities, I honestly don't see any way out to improve the quality of life in large cities in India, because the factors, there's no factor that I could find, political, technological, economic, financial, that says that somebody is accountable for the quality of life here and wants to do something about it, and no trends moving towards making it more livable. There are no trends. The only trend is fine, we will have metro. It's the only thing I can find. And metro we already have, so what's the deal?
Right? There's no novelty in that anymore.
But no metro we already have in all these. Mumbai didn't have, but Mumbai now has a metro. And all the large cities in India have metros, including even now smaller cities have metros. So metro is a done deal. But metro doesn't remove the problems. The water is bound to be an issue. There's just no escape. But everybody thinks, look, we can keep expanding here. Our firm can expand here. They hire. I mean, every time I talk to young people in Vidped, they're moving to Bangalore, right? So this is the biggest destination for the young people that I talk to. So I know this is not going to stop. The attraction is too much. Anyway, enough from me. Okay, it's not my place to talk here. All right. Anything else from you, Karthik?
I guess just to end on probably on a relatively positive note, because as a climate scientist, it's really easy to be cynical and negative all the time. Yeah, I would it's just, I think, me as someone in their 20s, hopeful for experts who are willing to put their money where their mouth is and come up with uh, positive, proactive changes rather than playing catch up and reactive policy implementations all the time, and stop putting the onus on the public to save water or recycle their trash and things like that, which hardly even make a dent in the overall carbon emissions or water utilization. It's hardly a drop in a bucket. So
Also, water is too small a deal.
Right.
Because agriculture and then industry, this is where it is.
Right. So yeah, I think we in India, we definitely need to have more climate conscious professionals come up. We need more avenues where young bright minds of the country can pool their collective talent towards creating an interface between science and policy making, especially in the field of climate change. And I don't know, maybe more people in the future, they can have a happy accident like me, where they end up in a field which they had no idea about, but they end up realizing that this is the need of the hour, and becoming.
All right, let's end it here on this optimistic note, as you say. Okay, I'm happy to say, very good to listen to you and to hear to you. I'll be back with another young person or an expert or a young expert soon. Till then, bye everybody. Bye.
Pleasure, Dr. Mathur. Thanks for having me here.